quality and from school quality to opportunity. The United States is also important because it has extensive public data. Pew Research Center continues to track American views on racial discrimination. In 2024, Pew reported that about 80% of U.S. adults or more saw at least some discrimination against Muslims, Jews, Arabs, Black people, and Hispanic people. In 2025, Pew also reported continuing partisan differences in how Americans perceive discrimination against racial and ethnic groups. So, the United States presents a paradox. It is one of the countries most associated with civil rights ideals, constitutional equality, and public anti-discrimination law. But it is also one of the countries where racial hierarchy has been historically deep, legally explicit, and statistically documented. This does not mean every American is racist. That would be absurd. It means the United States has one of the most extensively documented racial systems in the modern world. And that is different from saying that every individual in the country holds racist beliefs. Case Study 3, India. India requires special care because the word race does not fully capture the main structure of exclusion. Much of the issue is caste, descent, colorism, religion, ethnicity, and regional identity. So should India be included in a discussion about racism? That depends on how we define racism. If racism means only prejudice based on modern Western racial categories, such as black, white, Asian, or indigenous, then India may not fit neatly. But if racism includes discrimination based on descent, inherited status, skin tone, ancestry, caste, and group hierarchy, then India becomes extremely important. The International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination defines racial discrimination broadly, to include distinctions based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has also stated that discrimination based on descent includes caste and analogous systems of inherited status. That matters because caste is not just a social preference. It has historically regulated marriage, labor, residence, purity, status, occupation, and social interaction. Human Rights Watch described caste discrimination against India's Dalits as a form of hidden apartheid, and documented severe abuses, including social exclusion, violence, and discrimination. Human Rights Watch's 2025 country report on India also stated that authorities continue to discriminate against members of minority communities. Historical and social artifacts here are different from the South African and American cases. Instead of whites-only signs, the artifacts may include caste-based housing segregation, temple entry restrictions, separate wells, manual scavenging, marriage restrictions, school discrimination, caste markers and surnames, and social exclusion from food, touch, and ritual participation. Colorism also matters. Across many societies, darker skin is associated with lower status, and lighter skin is associated with beauty, wealth, modernity, or marriageability. This is not identical to Western racism, but it often operates through similar status hierarchies. So the India case forces us to ask a deeper question. Are we only interested in racism as a Western racial category, or are we interested in inherited human hierarchy more broadly? If the answer is the broader one, India belongs in the discussion. But we should be careful not to say, India is the most racist country as a simple statement. India is huge, diverse, multilingual, multi-religious, and regionally complex. It contains many different social realities. The evidence-based conclusion is more precise. India is one of the most important global cases of descent-based discrimination, caste hierarchy, colorism, and group-based exclusion. Whether we call that racism depends on the definition. But under international human rights language, descent-based discrimination is clearly relevant to racial discrimination. What about Europe? Europe complicates the discussion because many European countries do not define themselves through race in the same way the United States does. Some European governments even avoid racial categories in official data. But avoiding racial language does not eliminate racial discrimination. The European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights surveyed people of African descent in 13 EU countries and reported that almost half faced racism and discrimination in daily life. The FRA also reported that the 5-year prevalence of racial discrimination when looking for work was highest in Austria, Germany, and Finland, with rates of 59%, 56%, and 53% respectively. That is extremely important. It means that if we rank countries by reported anti-Black discrimination in certain European contexts, countries such as Austria, Germany, and Finland become central to the discussion. But again, we must be careful. That does not mean Germany, Austria, or Finland are automatically the most racist countries in the world. It means that in this survey, among this particular population, in this particular region, reported discrimination was very high. This is exactly why the title of this episode matters: what the evidence can and cannot tell us. The evidence can tell us where specific groups report high levels of discrimination. The evidence cannot always tell us that one entire country is morally worse than another, across every dimension of racism. So can we name the top 3? Here is the honest answer. Not with scientific certainty. There is no global racism scoreboard that fairly compares every country across the same measures. But if we are looking for 3 major case studies where the evidence is deep, serious, and historically significant, then the strongest discussion includes South Africa, for apartheid and legally enforced racial classification; the United States, for slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, and one of the most documented histories of institutional racism; India, for caste, descent-based discrimination, colorism, and inherited group hierarchy. If the metric is current reported anti-Black discrimination in the EU, then countries such as Austria, Germany, and Finland become very important. If the metric is survey attitudes toward neighbors of a different race, then countries identified in World Values Survey-based analyses may rise to the top. If the metric is historical legal racial apartheid, South Africa is nearly unavoidable. If the metric is historical racial slavery and long-term institutional effects, the United States is central. If the metric is a descent-based inherited hierarchy, India is central. So the real conclusion is not one ranking. It is a framework. The strongest evidence-based conclusion, the most responsible answer is this: there is no single reliable global ranking of the most racist countries, because racism is multidimensional. But some countries stand out under specific forms of evidence. South Africa stands out as one of the clearest modern examples of legalized racial hierarchy through apartheid. The United States stands out for the depth of its racial history, from slavery and Jim Crow to redlining and continuing disparities. India stands out for caste, descent-based discrimination, colorism, and inherited social hierarchy, even though these do not always map neatly onto Western racial categories. And parts of Europe stand out in current survey research showing high levels of reported discrimination against people of African descent. The key lesson is this: racism is not only a personal attitude, it can be a law, it can be a map, it can be a school boundary, it can be a marriage rule, it can be a police practice, it can be a job market, it can be a housing system, it can be a caste hierarchy, it can be a beauty standard, it can be an immigration policy. So instead of asking only which country is the most racist, we should ask, what kind of racism are we measuring? Who is experiencing it? Is it historical or current? Is it individual, cultural, institutional, or legal? What evidence supports the claim? And most importantly, what can be changed? Because the goal of evidence should not be to shame countries for entertainment. The goal should be to understand how human beings build systems of exclusion, and how those systems can be dismantled. That is the data before opinion approach. Not outrage first, not ranking first, not stereotypes first, evidence first, context first, then the conclusions.